Okay, good evening, everybody. For those of you who don't know, on here and on YouTube, my name is Bob Bruner. I am the exotic forest pest educator with the Department of Entomology at Purdue University. Tonight, we are going to be talking about one of the more often seen invasives nowadays, the spotted lanternfly. Hopefully, you have not yet encountered this insect, but I want to make sure that you are prepared for those times when you do see it, because unfortunately, it is spreading through our state and it will quickly become a nuisance to a lot of things, a lot of plants, and a lot of things that we love. So you are seeing it on your screen right now. One of the reasons why we really don't want to see this insect is right here in front of you. So what you're looking at is a population of spotted lanternfly that are infesting a grape arbor. These insects love grapes amongst other plants, and they love them so much that they'll overfeed on them and eventually kill grapes. And this is along with a small number of other trees and plants that we are very concerned about, but they also have a very large host range. So we're concerned about them spreading across the state and not doing significant damage, but really becoming a major nuisance on a lot of the commodities we love and potentially doing severe damage to a specific small number of plants. And I'm going to go into that as we go through what we have here tonight. So just a little background information on this insect. A lot of you have probably seen some of this information before. They are an invasive species. So they are a species that is non-native. They do not belong here. They're outside of their native range. And due to the fact that they are non-native, they have no natural controls in our environment. That means that the plants do not know how to defend themselves. The predators do not yet recognize them as a prey item. So they're able to move through our landscape essentially unhindered. They're related to aphids, cicadas, stink bugs, squash bugs, you name it. The thing that makes them related to them is the fact that they all have what we refer to as piercing, sucking mouth parts. They will put these mouth parts directly into plant tissue and begin to drain out the sap of the plant, drinking in the nutrients and water that's flowing through the xylem and phloem of the plant tissue. And like I said earlier, they have a broad host range. They're able to consume a lot of different plants, but there is only a small number of plants they really prefer, and it is that small number of plants we are concerned about because they tend to do the most damage to them. Now, a little bit on where these insects came from. We're learning more and more about their origins. Now, spotted lanternfly are native to a significant portion of Asia. However, if you went to Asia and tried to find them, you'll probably find that they're fairly uncommon. They stick to a primary host plant and they don't really move around a whole lot. So if you stopped and talked to a forester or an arborist or a gardener in Asia, they may not really have good knowledge of this insect. We believe that we are getting an infestation from a population group that uh, originated in the Korean Peninsula. But again, they are kind of widespread throughout a lot of areas in Asia. Now, we believe also that they arrived here on some imported stone product, and you can kind of see that in this picture here. Now, imagine that you were the USDA customs agent who was going through trying to identify anything that may have a potentially dangerous organism on it, and you saw this stone in front of you with these funny muddy shapes on it. I feel for that agent because I doubt they would have recognized what they're looking at. Even I wouldn't have, and I've been doing this job for a long time now. What you're seeing are egg masses of spotted lanternfly that look for all the world just like a smear of mud. Excuse me. So these were originally detected in 2014 in Pennsylvania. However, we believe that they entered the United States sometime around 2012, and they have been steadily spreading since. If you look up a map of their spread, just about all of Pennsylvania has a thoroughly established infestation now, unfortunately. Now, we need to ask then, how is this insect spreading? How is it getting around at least our state? So in Indiana, what we are finding is that these insects are typically associated with railroads. They could stick to all kinds of vehicles. If you are visiting an area with a known infestation, I highly suggest you check your vehicle heading in and out of that area. Adults can hitch a ride on the sides of cars, on the sides of trailers, and of course, rail cars. They can lay their eggs on them depending on what time of year it is, and then you carry them to another place, and that is how infestations spread. We are finding that most infestations in Indiana are spreading directly along those rail lines. And I have a few maps I could show you later to give you an idea of what counties we're currently looking at with infestations. And of course, any cut plants or firewood of plants or species that are going to be associated with these insects are at risk. So you want to keep maintaining that same firewood safety. You probably recall all the bumper stickers that said, "Don't move the firewood." That is still just as true. Please burn it where you buy it or take care of it where you buy it. Now, what you're looking at here, this is a distribution map that was created several years ago trying to kind of guesstimate the best areas where spotted lanternfly could infest and be successful. And if you look, you can see that Indiana is right under the gun here. We have a lot of area in the state that is very, very suited to infestation by spotted lanternfly. That area of reddish orange is areas where they're going to be able to survive very, very well. The yellow only a little bit worse, and the green it's pretty unlikely they'll be there. But that kind of tells you the story that a lot of the Midwest is very, very suitable ground for them. The reason that is because a lot of Asia shares this similar environmental conditions. We're essentially along the same latitude, so our environments are going to match very, very closely, even if we don't have all the same plants and other organisms. Now, what I have up in front of you right now is a distribution map that was created in September of 2024, so nearly a year ago. And you could see here that this infestation has spread throughout Pennsylvania and several of the eastern states. You can see Maryland, New Jersey are thoroughly covered. And if you look at Indiana as of 2024 in that month, you can see that we have around 6 counties that have known infestations. If we fast forward to this year, I downloaded this map just a few days ago, and you can see it's updated as of May 29th, 2025. I've got a red box around Indiana, and now we have somewhere in the neighborhood of about 14 counties, I believe, that have known infestations. And you could see that those follow pretty closely the rail lines. One of the infestation routes goes right across the top of the state, and it goes into the Chicagoland area. And sure enough, along that rail line, in Chicago, there's a park, and that park has discovered it has an infestation of spotted lanternfly. And we're beginning to find them moving further south through Indiana. You could see, I believe it's Hamilton County there that's highlighted near Indy. Just south of that, I believe it's Shelby County, and so on and so forth. So they are definitely on the move, and I would expect this map to change even more after this year. We have great conditions right now for them. And just so you're aware, right now we have nymphs that are beginning to develop quite heavily throughout the state, so they are active right now. Now, I told you about this insect, so let's make sure we can identify it. It has a few lookalikes, but not too many of them. However, if you just kind of take a close look at what this insect looks like, you're going to be able to tell that it doesn't really look like much of anything we normally have here. So if we kind of break it down, we see that the adults have beige wings, black spots, and then they're kind of cut in half by a darker area near the ends of the wings or the tips. The hind wings have bright red with white and black patches on them and some polka dots as well. Not many organisms in Indiana are going to share that trait, so when you see them spread or flutter their wings, that flash of red is going to be real obvious. Their abdomen is going to be kind of striped black. Those are the sclera or the individual armor plates on the bug itself, and then their abdomen, the actual flesh of it, is kind of colored yellow. It's not easy to see when they haven't been feeding, but as they begin developing eggs inside their bodies, or if they eat a significant amount, their abdomens will distend a little bit and you'll be able to see that much more clearly. Now, I like to break down what to look for going by the insect's life cycle, and I think it's a really effective way to understand what you're going to want to look for as time goes on. So I'm going to start where we are right at the kind of end of the egg stage, moving into the larval stage here. So most of our eggs are hatched out with only a few remaining now. And we are beginning to move into first instar, second instar larva. Now, the first instar larva will have started to appear in April, and they'll be very small with mainly black in color with white polka dots, and they're starting to grow, and we're moving into that second instar territory. throughout June and July. That second instar is just going to be a bigger version. It's going to have um, the same black with polka dots on it, but you're going to see wing pads developing where their wings will be, and they're going to be more ambulatory. They're going to move into their third instar as time goes on throughout the rest of this month, getting bigger and bigger until eventually they become their fourth and final larval instar, which is going to be bright red with black patterning and some white dots on it. I am mostly guessing that probably people are going to be seeing and reporting these bright red insects. This is how we originally discovered them in our state. Someone asked, "What's this funny mutated lady beetle?" on a Facebook group. Someone identified it and reported it to DNR. Eventually, that larval instar will finish its development and become an adult. It's going to shed its skin one last time. In July, you're going to have fully winged adults appear. Those adults are going to hang around, mate, and continue to feed all the way through technically September, or I'm sorry, it's technically December. I have not yet heard a population surviving that long in Indiana yet. It's very probable, though. I have definitely had confirmation that we've seen populations all the way up to Thanksgiving. Now, that doesn't mean that those populations are feeding per se. It just means they're still alive. They may not be successfully mating. I doubt they're going to have much fecundity past September or October. However, it's a possibility. So they can last in our environment for a long time. And then when they eventually lay their eggs throughout the fall months, those eggs will get covered in a substance that very neatly camouflages them against whatever surface they're on, protects them against temperature changes, and it can make them really difficult to treat with any kind of chemical insecticide. So to give you an idea what these look like in real life, here are some pictures that were taken by members of Indiana's DNR, Division of Plant Pathology and Entomology. And what you could see is that the early instars are these kind of cute looking little guys who are all black with white polka dots. The later instars are much larger than they are. They're going to be about the size of a small stink bug. The littler ones are going to be much smaller than that, like sizes of ants, and then slowly getting bigger. And these will be very obvious. You're going to see them moving and walking. They're very ambulatory. They will move between plants as they begin to overpopulate and try to find better feeding locations. I also want you to keep your eyes open for the eggs of these insects, which you could see here. This is a little challenging. These eggs are well camouflaged. You could see some of them because they didn't get covered by the substance the female secretes. So oftentimes the female may run out of energy to produce it. She may get eaten by a bird before she finishes producing it, or she may just plain forget. And sometimes those eggs are left exposed. However, you could see all that mass covered by the substance is kind of clear. And it's very obviously there. You're looking at what looks like mud, and it makes it very difficult to tell how many egg masses you have. Now, one game I kind of like to play with people who come to my program is I always put this picture in front of them and ask them, where do you see the egg mass? I'm going to spare you guys the game for right now, and I'm going to give you a little help. They're right there, right in the middle. For all the world, that just looks like some cracked mud that's dried out on the side of the tree. Maybe someone drove their truck by a little fast and they sprayed mud on it. That's very, very difficult to find. We often refer to this portion of the life cycle as cryptic. We can't see it very well. It's difficult to find, and you need special training to really be able to see it. Here are what the eggs are going to look like if they were not covered at all. And this is a picture that's taken from one of the more recent infestations in the Mishawaka area. This one you can see at the bottom there was taken by Vince Burkle, who was a nursery inspector posted up there. He's still up there, just doing slightly different work now. And if you look at the eggs a little closer, you can see that there are holes in the top of the center of them. That means that those eggs have hatched and insects have already come out of them. So this was a successful insect hatch right here. Now let's go over some of their feeding behaviors. What are their habits? What kind of damage are they going to be doing here? Well, the feeding is pretty simple. It's going to be a lot like what you see out of aphids or cicadas. They're going to move to different portions of the trees that they feed on. They're going to put their mouth parts in. They're just going to graze for several minutes at a time. They're lazy feeders. They rely on the turgor pressure within plant cells to push the liquid into their bodies. They're not sucking the liquid out. So it saves on a lot of energy there, but it means that they have to graze for extended periods of time. We don't yet have a really good understanding of what the reproductive success is going to look like on different plants. We're still gaining some knowledge in that area, but we do know that they are successful on certain kinds of plants. So, what are the plants that we are most worried about? So, first off, grape is at the most risk right now. They will kill grapes, they will overfeed on them and eventually kill them. We have a lot of vineyards in Indiana that are very concerned about these right now. They will also attack American river birch as well as maple and black walnut. They will also sometimes attack roses. And then lastly, we find them mostly on their primary host, which is another invasive species, tree of heaven. They have the most reproductive success of tree of heaven, but they will move to other trees as time goes on. I actually work with a PhD candidate at Purdue who studies these, and she's found that these insects will stay a lot of their time on tree of heaven, but part of the way through the summer, they will immediately migrate over to black walnuts and other trees. So that is something that we are concerned about. Now, a little bit on their movement patterns, they will hit the same quote unquote hot trees year after year. They like trees that they know they're successful on. And when they find a tree that they can work with, they're going to keep because then they know their young will be successful on it too. The nymphs are going to prefer shoots, whereas the adults are going to prefer trunks of trees. Most likely, that is creating a nice segregation between the feeding areas, so that way the adults and the nymphs aren't competing for the same feeding sites. These choices are going to vary a little bit throughout the season, though. I'm going to show you this graph right here. It was put out by Penn State Extension. What this graph is showing us is that the entire season, they're going to prefer grape and tree of heaven most of all. But if they're shifting hosts around, early on in the season, they're probably going to prefer rose. And then later, as time goes on, they're going to move black walnut and then over to river birch, willow, sumac, and lastly, maple. The way I look at it is this way. These insects are continuing to develop, their populations are growing. They're going to fill up grape and tree of heaven first. Earlier in the season, as they filled those up, they're going to move to rose until they filled those up. And then later in the season, they'll move off of rose and then they'll start looking for black walnuts or river birch or willow or sumac, etc. Because all the best feeding spots are already taken, so they're taking the next best ones. If you look at these timings too, these timings also probably coincide really closely when those plants are doing their greatest amount of uptake. For example, May and June for roses is exactly when those roses are going to be blooming the most. River birch, willow, and sumac do their big blooms and uptakes and creations of seeds during after July. Black walnut does the same thing between June and July. And maple is the one that's the furthest out in the season. They're going to start doing that in August, and like their sap production is going to go through the roof. So you could see that these insects are opportunistic. They are looking for plants that are going to be at the height of their healthiest, and they're taking advantage of it so they can feed. Now, a little on Tree of Heaven, their primary host. Tree of Heaven is the thing that they are guaranteed to be found on. If there is a Tree of Heaven nearby, they will automatically go to it. The reason it is their primary host is because they share a range. Tree of Heaven is native where they are from. These organisms have evolved together and they have a relationship with one another. Unfortunately, Tree of Heaven in our environment is incredibly damaging. It is one of the worst invasive plants that I can think of. This little tree, or big tree, depending on how large it gets, can damage building foundations. It can rip through sidewalks. It is almost impossible to kill without a significant amount of work and several years of that work, too. Now, I want to make sure that before you leave tonight, you have all the information you need to be able to successfully identify a tree of heaven. So first off, let's go over some of the names that it has. Common names are important. People call them different things depending on where you are. That could include Chinese sumac, stink tree, stinking sumac. I don't want to think of someone trying to sell this stuff, but I'm sure someone has. You never want to buy any kind of tree of heaven. It is just absolutely nasty. They have a very, very unpleasant smell. I've heard people refer to it as smelling like rancid peanut butter or rancid butter, even. I couldn't tell you what it smells exactly like myself, but it smells awful. I can tell you that much. I was able to find 6-inch saplings on my property because I walked by them and I could smell them. The trouble with them is too, is that they can regrow from small parts and pieces, and they will do so very, very quickly. If you do something like cut a tree of heaven off and straight to the ground, like you just leave a stump, you will encourage the tree of heaven to begin developing all sorts of new sprouts from the rest of it that is left in the ground. And where you had one tree of heaven, you'll now have 6 or 7 more of them growing. So I highly recommend looking up some of our work in extension on how to manage Tree of Heaven. You can also contact your local SISMA because you don't want to just try to willy-nilly take this out on your own without knowing what you're getting into. Now, a little more on their identification. They have a really easy trait you can use to identify them. Their leaves are compound, they're alternately arranged. So what you're looking at here is not a branch with several leaves, you're looking at a leaf with several leaflets. Those leaves have a little toothed margin as you get close to the base of it where it connects to the petiole. And that little tooth there will often have an embedded gland that you could see on the underside of the leaf. My colleague Lenny Farley is showing you that gland in this picture. It's entirely possible that that gland you see is what's creating that awful smell to try to keep us away from them. Tree of Heaven also has some bark that I think kind of stands out, though oftentimes people will confuse their bark patterns for like walnut or other things. So I don't really see that as a reliable way to identify Tree of Heaven. So you can always feel free to double check this. I will post this on YouTube. And for those of you who are on YouTube, you know now where to stop and rewind if you need to go over that again. Now, as for the damage that this insect does, the damage itself is pretty straightforward. So generally, we're not finding that spotted lanternfly is transmitting any diseases or pathogens that we know of. However, the mechanics of their feeding do wound plants and it opens them up to infection by different pathogens. So they're going to be leaving tiny holes in the plants that are going to be leaking out the sap of the plant itself. That means that fungal pathogens blowing around the area can easily get into those wounds and infect the plant. They're also taking away nutrients that the plant needs, so they're reducing its capacity to be able to survive the winter and regrow stronger. So what'll happen is you're going to see trees start displaying signs of stress where they won't be able to grow back as well. A general loss of resilience is maybe you might see some limb death, smaller canopies, loss of growth. And with repeated infestations year after year, sensitive trees are going to start dying because they simply can't regrow after they keep getting drained season after season. Now, one of the other problems that these insects create through indirect damage is that they create honeydew. So just like an aphid, these insects are taking in a lot of sugar from their diets. Their bodies can't process all the sugar they're taking in, so they excrete it out in a form we call honeydew. Honeydew will rain out of trees and the other plants that they're in and fall off of that and onto any of the understory below. Say if you have ornamentals planted underneath, just like you see in this picture right here. Now, the honeydew doesn't damage those plants. Sooty mold will begin to develop on the honeydew. Now, sooty mold will only develop on honeydew. It doesn't grow into the plant itself, but it does cut off the plant's ability to photosynthesize because it's now blocking that tissue from receiving sunlight. And it's creating a brand new problem where a lot of your plants will start suffering because of it. And it's just really gross if you've ever encountered it. I encourage you all to look up some of the videos at Penn State Extension. They show you what it looks like when spotted lanternfly is feeding and creating honeydew. It quite literally rains out of the tree. I'm not exaggerating. Go and look up those videos. Now, a little on the infestations we have here in Indiana. Some of this information is a little bit old. I'm going to try to catch up as best I can. We first started seeing our infestations in two places, in Huntington and in Switzerland counties, Indiana. So the infestation in Huntington is in a residential area that is along a railroad track. It also has a lot of unmitigated tree of heaven growing throughout that area by the railroad tracks and on private properties where DNR is having to go and treat for these insects. We don't think that they came off of the trains. The trains in that area move too fast and they don't really stop. However, we believe that maybe someone visited somewhere like Pennsylvania or moved from Pennsylvania, and arrived in Huntington, and they accidentally carried like an egg mass or some adults back with them, and that's how this problem started. The same is also true for our infestation in Switzerland. This one we did confirm. Someone moved from Pennsylvania to this area. There was a lot of unmitigated tree of heaven throughout the woods. And I should have said this earlier, but every orange dot you're seeing there is a tree of heaven that has spotted lanternfly on it. So if we look at Huntington, you could see it kind of following property lines and the edges of property. If we look at Switzerland, oops, sorry, you could see that it's just kind of out randomly in the middle of the woods because it's slowly been spreading from different things. Now we're also, like I mentioned, seeing it in most of the northern portion of the state following a railroad line. And I love this picture. To me, this kind of sums up Indiana real nice in a picture. It's all green with very handsome railroad engine right there, except there is a problem in this image. All the green you see up in the grass is all tree of heaven right along those railroads. And you have a train there that is stopped. So that is a perfect storm of circumstances needed to allow spotted lanternfly to go ahead and infest that tree of heaven. They could have hitched a ride on the train slowed or stopped where they felt comfortable hopping off, and of course they have a food source right there. And this picture was taken outside of a rail yard where there is quite a large infestation growing in that area that DNR is working on mitigating. And of course, we're seeing they begin to move into other residential areas. This one was taken close to that residential area, and you can see it's a tree of heaven with an older, later instar insect. Here's some of the adults feeding on the trunk of a tree of heaven. And then perhaps the most interesting picture, we have some, I believe, Virginia creeper right here that they are also feeding on, kind of demonstrating that they aren't bound to a host that closely. They are willing to move if they need to. They're able to feed and be successful. Now, let's get into the nitty-gritty of management. The good news about this insect is that it's treatable. They do respond well to pesticides. Now, unfortunately, their populations develop far too fast to try to not use pesticides on it. We have to. And what we are finding is that usually a systemic treatment is really effective on them, depending on what life stage you're looking at. We typically find that we are spraying for immature insects and we are injecting or using a soil drench of a systemic insecticide to affect the adults. The issues that come up from this are that we continue to have to retreat because these populations grow at a large rate. So every year the insects come back and we have to keep treating again and again. And we run the risk of creating a resistance in the insect and just the trees getting to them fast enough to be able to treat them and save the tree. And of course, one of the other nuisances is having just all of the dead spotted lanternfly to clean up afterwards. Here's a breakdown of a treatment schedule that Penn State put out that I really like. I think this really sums up nicely how to go ahead and treat for them. So through the winter months, we're doing egg scraping. DNR does this pretty regularly where they take any number of tools, anything that can just scrape the eggs off of the side of a tree or a building. Last year, they got somewhere in the neighborhood of 17,000 eggs scraped, which really does help control them. As we begin to move into February, March, and April, you're seeing them use horticultural sprays on eggs. I believe they were telling me that they found that soybean oil is really effective on the egg masses because it'll cut off their source of oxygen and suffocate the eggs and prevent them from hatching. Now, they have on here, Penn State says to use sticky traps in May. I can only assume they mean for monitoring. The populations of this insect are very large. You're not going to be able to control it with sticky traps. I myself don't like sticky traps because often you catch several non-target species, and you never want to be the person who finds a mouse in a sticky trap, so I really don't advise myself using them. Contact insecticides you can start using in May through October, and if you're using a contact, that means you're spraying. Those are intended to affect the juvenile insects. Soil drenches that are being applied post-bloom are going for the adults. And then you can see that trunk sprays or tree ejections are also aimed at the adults. So July through September, you really only are going to have adult insects there. The soil drench post-bloom is probably intended to try to do its best to catch both adults and immature insects. Now, one of the things that I want to point out here is that a lot of folks will have problems with using systemic insecticides, and for good reasons. They don't want to make impacts on insects they want to keep, like pollinators. However, we're finding that with a lot of these plants, they aren't plants that are often visited by pollinators. And if you are doing applications post-bloom, that means the pollinators aren't going to be coming by anyways. They will have done their business and are already off to another plant that's blooming. So we're able to follow label directions and do pretty well making sure that we don't damage the environment at all. Now, there are some biocontrol options that are currently being researched. There are a few USDA labs that are looking at trying to use parasitoids to affect these insects. However, the success has been a little hit or miss. The parasitoids they try to use are a type of wasp that lays its eggs inside of the spotted lanternfly, so that way their young use it as food. However, it appears that these are really difficult to rear outside of their native range, so I'm not sure how successful that's going to be. There are a couple of native entomopathogenic fungi, try saying that twice. These are funguses that specifically attack insects. Think of like the cordyceps fungus you've heard of that make the zombie ants. This isn't the same thing as that. It's just a fungus that will attack them and kill them. There are two that we see right now, Baccoa major and Bavaria bassiana. Some of these are actually already sold as a pesticide option. I've actually worked in a lab that's worked quite a bit with Bavaria bassiana, and I would be willing to guess that the insect pictured here is probably infected with that fungus. I've even had pictures sent to me by members of DNR that are showing the insects in the wild already infected with the fungus. So we know that it's an effective enemy against it. We just don't know how easily can we apply it. So what can you do right now? Right now, we're going to have to wait. I'm going to beg everyone to please report this insect if you see it. We are not yet at the point where you're going to start to need to treat it yourself, but we are also probably not going to be long from it. I'm guessing they're going to explode and we're going to have to start teaching you how to treat for them. But right now, we're asking you to please contact DNR. You can reach out to me and you'll be able to report these insects. And I'm going to go over that a little more in a bit here, but I also want to go over some frequently asked questions that we see on this one. So one of the things people ask me quite a bit is what is the best pesticide to use in spotted lanternflies and how should I use it? Typically, we find that a pesticide that has an active ingredient called dinotefuran is the most effective right now. That doesn't mean that other pesticides aren't. This one does seem to be the best. It has several different brand names. You can find these pretty easily in most home improvement stores. And I would generally tell people use it as like a soil drench, or if there's a spray option for it. Don't attempt to inject this yourself unless you are someone who is already trained in that, because it's very easy to really badly damage a tree if you don't know what you're doing. Another question I get is how does this compare to emerald ash borer? It doesn't. This is not an insect that's going to rewrite our landscape. It's going to become a big nuisance. Some of our industries are going to be really concerned. We'll have to work with them to make sure we can protect them. You're going to have to deal with it on your ornamentals, but we're not going to lose a whole species because of their presence. So I wouldn't panic over them. And I kind of follow lead that kind of leads me into that next one, how it's going to affect your garden or landscape. They're going to be a messy nuisance, and we're probably going to have to start creating some methods for cleaning them up, treating them, seeing what we can get out to folks that's going to make it a little bit more feasible. And lastly, are these going to bite us? These insects do not have the capacity to bite a person. They won't even sting you. They are not interested in people at all. They're pretty harmless in that regard. Think of trying to handle a stink bug or a cicada. They don't care about you at all. All right, so what can you do right now? First off, best piece of advice I have, remove tree of heaven. Tree of heaven is a nasty invasive. You do not want it. If you rip out tree of heaven, you are taking out a food source from these insects. Go ahead and report, and you can use these different reporting resources to try to get some information to us. Edmaps.org is a great reporting resource where you can actually put a pin in a map and say what you found. The Great Lakes Early Detection Network has an app that you can also use. I usually tell people to please call 1-866-NO-EXOTIC. That's that phone number you see there. That's the DNR hotline for reporting these things. Or you can email us. I'm going to have my email at the end of this if you're interested in that. What we want you to do is when you do report this one, write down where you are, take a picture, and maybe collect a sample so you can send it in to us and we can identify it for you. Normally, if you see it and you take a picture and you email it to me, I'll probably be able to ID it pretty easily. These insects stand out quite a bit. And of course, stay aware and help educate your community on what you're seeing. And the last thing I have for those of you on YouTube, and of course our guests here, is that here is my contact information. I always check my email every day. So if you see something you want to just tell me and not have to worry about dealing with DNR or anything else, you're free to do that. Send me a picture, tell me where you saw it, and I will make sure that the people who need to know about it get the information. We have lots of resources you can use. I run social media on Facebook and Instagram. We have the Purdue Landscape Report that you can look into where I publish regularly. You can also get lots of information out of the Emerald Ash Borer University, which I know a lot of you have been attending, and of course, Penn State Extension helps. All right, so with that, thank you everybody on YouTube. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the comments, and I will see all of you at the next one.